Wind cuts through empty streets, windows stare out, glassless. Roofs sag under a century of Sierra Nevada winters. This is Bodie, California, a town of thousands reduced to silence, frozen exactly as it was left, down to the dust on the shelves. Roughly 110 buildings still stand here. That's it. Barely 5% of what once existed. The rest is gone, burned, collapsed, or scavenged by time. Somewhere behind these walls is the answer to a stranger question. Why did 800 people just leave? Not a fire, not a flood, not one single catastrophe. Bodie's death took decades, a slow bleed of dwindling ore, then 2 fires, and finally a signature on a piece of paper in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles from the mountains it would silence. To understand how a town vanishes, you have to go back to before it existed at all, back to 1859, and a prospector named W.S. Bodie, who found gold in these hills and never lived to see what he started. Bodie and his partner stumbled onto placer gold in a remote gulch east of the Sierra Nevada crest. It was a modest find at first, nothing like the strikes that had drawn thousands to California a decade earlier, but it was enough to start a camp. That winter, Bodie set out for supplies through the mountains. A blizzard caught him in the open. He froze to death before spring, before a single permanent building rose where his strike had been made. Miners who came after him misspelled his name out of respect, or carelessness, or both. Bodie became Bodie. A town would eventually carry his name into boomtown legend, a town its own founder never once set foot in. For nearly 2 decades, Bodie stayed small, a scattering of cabins, a few dozen hopeful miners scratching at modest veins. Nothing suggested this quiet gulch would soon become one of the most notorious boomtowns in the American West. Then, in 1876, everything changed. The Standard Company's miners broke into a rich vein of ore, later called the Bodie Bonanza. Word spread fast, and in the American West, word of gold could build a city out of nothing in a single season. Within 2 years, tents and shacks multiplied into streets. Saloons, stores, and stamp mills rose almost overnight. It was the same pattern that had built other instant cities across the frontier. A strike, a rush, and suddenly thousands of strangers in a place that hadn't existed the year before. By the height of the boom, Bodie had dozens of saloons on Main Street alone, a thriving Chinatown with its own temple, and a reputation so lawless that children reportedly prayed, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bodie." But even at its wildest, Bodie was already sitting on borrowed time. Every ounce of gold pulled from those hills was an ounce that would never be replaced. And the ore, however rich it once looked, was never going to last forever. By 1881, barely 5 years after the bonanza began, the signs of decline were already unmistakable. The richest ore was thinning out, and the population that had exploded almost overnight was about to collapse just as fast, down to a number that would define the town for the rest of its existence. Then, between 1876 and 1878, the Standard Company hits the vein everyone had been chasing, the Bodie Bonanza. Overnight, a sleepy camp of a few hundred prospectors becomes one of the richest strikes in the American West. It's a pattern the West already knew. At Alder Gulch in Montana, a single strike pulled thousands of miners into the hills almost overnight, birthing Virginia City out of nothing but rumor and raw hunger for gold. Bodie followed the same script. Within 2 years, tents gave way to timber, timber gave way to brick, and a barren mountainside became a city that some accounts claim held 10,000 people. The exact number is disputed. Sources swing wildly, from 5,000 to 10,000 souls. But whatever the true figure, Bodie had become one of the largest towns in California almost by accident. Main Street stretched for blocks, lined with dozens of saloons. Men drank, gambled, and settled arguments with fists or guns, and Bodie earned a reputation as one of the most lawless towns in the West. The phrase, "the bad man from Bodie," entered Western folklore for a reason. Shootings, robberies, and brawls were common enough that some newspapers claimed a man was killed on Main Street almost every day. But Bodie wasn't only miners and gunmen. A substantial Chinatown grew along the edge of town, complete with its own temple, home to immigrants who worked the mines and built lives few histories bothered to record. At its peak, Bodie had banks, a stock exchange, a railway, breweries, and even a red light district, every mark of a real city, thrown up in a place that had been empty wilderness 20 years earlier. Photographs from these years show a skyline of headframes and smokestacks, a mountain town that never slept, where ore wagons rattled through the night and stamp mills pounded around the clock. Inside the mills, stamp machines crushed thousands of tons of ore a day, the mechanical heartbeat of the entire town, a sound residents said never stopped, day or night, for years. This was the picture of American boom-time ambition, a town built on nothing but rock and rumor, growing faster than its own infrastructure, faster than law, faster than anyone could plan for what came after. But bonanzas, by definition, run out. The standard vein that built this city was finite, and by the early 1880s, the ore assayers pulled from deep shafts was growing thinner, poorer, harder to justify mining. Investors who had poured money into new shafts started pulling back. Miners who had come chasing wages began drifting toward newer strikes in Nevada and beyond, and the exodus, once it started, moved fast. By 1881, the math simply stops working. The Standard Mine's rich veins are thinning, ore quality dropping year after year, and Bodie's population, once numbering in the thousands, slides to roughly 800. This isn't collapse from a single blow. It's a hinge point. The remaining gold can no longer support even a fraction of the boomtown's former crowd. Bodie tips quietly from thriving city towards something closer to a ghost town. Investors sense it first. Capital that once poured into new shafts and stamp mills dries up. Miners follow the money instead, drifting toward fresher strikes in Nevada, then further out, wherever rumor says the next bonanza is waiting. But Bodie doesn't vanish in 1881. It lingers, smaller, poorer, but stubbornly alive. Saloons stay open. Families stay put. For over a decade, a diminished town holds on against the odds. Then, in 1892, fire tears through the business district on Main Street. Wooden storefronts, warehouses, and offices, the commercial heart of what's left of Bodie, burn in a single catastrophic stretch. It's the first of two fires that will eventually erase most of Bodie's built history. 40 years apart, they bookend a town already dying economically, fire finishing what dwindling ore had started. So Bodie's death is not one dramatic overnight collapse. It's a two-stage unraveling, population bleeding out for over a decade, then infrastructure burning away in bursts, decades apart. Compare that to Tybo, Nevada. In 1881, the same year Bodie slid to 800 residents. The Tybo Consolidated Mining Company failed outright after its ore quality collapsed. By year's end, Tybo's population had crashed to about 100. Tybo didn't get a decade of decline. It got months. One failed company, one collapsing ore body, and a town emptied almost as fast as it had filled. Cerro Gordo tells a similar story, but with a darker edge. As silver prices fell, worsening crime compounded the economic bust, lawlessness accelerating a decline that ore depletion alone had already set in motion. Antela City, Colorado, once home to nearly 2,000 people, was completely abandoned by 1902. A bustling city, reduced to silence in under 2 decades, no different in outcome, just far quicker in pace. Against that backdrop, Bodie looks almost patient. A decade of shrinking population, then a fire in 1892, then more than 3 decades of hanging on before the next catastrophe even arrives. That patience is deceptive, though. Every year of holding on strips away a little more of what made Bodie a real town. Fewer families, fewer businesses, fewer reasons for anyone new to arrive. That patience is deceptive, though. Every year of holding on strips away a little more of what made Bodie a real town. Fewer families, fewer businesses, fewer reasons for anyone new to arrive. Then, decades after the boom had already faded, fire finishes what economics started. In 1932, flames tear through what's left of Bodie in a single afternoon, popularly blamed on a child playing near a trash fire. By nightfall, roughly 90% of the remaining town is gone. Saloons, stores, homes, decades of history reduced to ash, and blackened chimneys standing alone against the sky. It's a brutal irony. The fire that erases most of Bodie's physical evidence comes 50 years after the town's population had already collapsed. The glory years were gone long before the flames arrived. What survives the fire is a shrinking, stubborn remnant. By the 1940s, Bodie is almost entirely deserted, just a few hundred holdouts clinging to a town that refuses to fully die. Then, in 1942, the real death blow lands, and it doesn't come from the mountains. It comes from Washington, in the form of a single wartime order. The War Production Board issues Limitation Order L-208, forcing every non-essential gold mine in the country to shut down. Gold, the government decides, cannot compete with the metals a war machine actually needs. For Bodie, that order is a death sentence. Its last working mine goes silent. Its post office closes. The paperwork that ends permanent habitation in Bodie isn't a bust. It's a bureaucratic signature. It's a striking reversal. Nature didn't empty Bodie's last streets, nor did exhausted veins or falling gold prices. A signature on a federal order in wartime Washington did what 50 years of decline could not finish. So the popular story that Bodie emptied overnight, all at once, in some dramatic exodus, doesn't hold up. The real collapse took decades, dwindling ore, 2 separate fires, and finally, a wartime order. What's left today is roughly 110 structures, about 5% of the town that once stood here. Everything else is foundation stones, cellar holes, and open ground. In 1962, California made Bodie a state historic park, but not a restored one. Officials chose arrested decay. Buildings stabilized exactly as found. Shelves still stocked. Beds still made. Interiors frozen mid-abandonment. Visitors today still talk about a curse. Bad luck said to follow anyone who takes even a nail or a rusted bottle home. Rangers report packages mailed back years later, apologies enclosed. Folklore, not history, but it persists. Bodie never vanished overnight. It bled out slowly, then burned twice, then got legislated out of existence by a war it had nothing to do with. Its ruins are still standing, proof that some collapses take a lifetime to finish. Subscribe to see where the next ghost town story leads.